And we're live! I decided to be really early today. I even started before the time I said I was going to start. Now just waiting to see if Angie says, "Oh, you're late." I'm not late. I'm early. Better late than never! And tonight, I have a special guest star. Hi, Freya. Sure. Is she sniffing my pants? I was in the barn. Hey, Daddy. I'm getting ready to read Harry Potter. We are early tonight. Grab your scotch. No shirt? I'm at work? No, I'm going to keep my shirt on. Although I could take it off. I'm wearing a zip-up sports bra today. One I usually wear at the gym, but you know, I can't go to the gym right now. Is Angie here? Who else watching me? I only see my father, whose name is actually Sean Kelly, not Bob Johnson. It shows up as Bob Johnson for some stupid reason. Special man. So who else is watching me right now? It says I have 2 viewers. Nope, now I have 3 viewers. Who's watching me? Your viewers. Who are my viewers? Oh, Miss Martin. Oh, hi, Miss Martin. We're getting ready to read Harry Potter here in a moment. Now I have 5 viewers. Again, we're getting ready to read Harry Potter in a moment. I'm just waiting for Angie to show up. Now I have 6 viewers. We're starting story time early tonight because I have a meeting at 6 p.m. that I cannot miss. So we're gonna do story time early because I don't want to skip any days this week. As I will not be reading this weekend as I'm going down to Southern Illinois. So I don't know where Angie is. When people find out I'm reading Harry Potter and they disappear, it's kind of sad. The books are so much better than the movies, people. Now I have 2 viewers. I don't even know, is Angie here? Nope. Now I have 1 viewer, which means my father's here. Let me see. Invite. This is what I get for being early. I can't start reading early because she doesn't show up early. It's so frustrating. You, if you're gonna fart, you get out of my room. Dogs don't care. They fart anywhere. So do horses. Stop kicking me. Control your feet. When I upload this onto YouTube, I'm going to have to like edit out the first part of this because nobody's going to want to hear my life. Where is she? She's not typing. My dad's the only one here. Now she's here. Jesus. I've been live for like 5 freaking minutes waiting on you. What's up? Why are you late? Huh? Why are you late? All right, is everybody ready? Because I'm ready to do this. Oh yeah, you send your little hearts. You're lucky I love you. Alrighty, we're only reading 1 chapter because people have places to be and things to do. Alright, chapter 14, Snape's Grudge. Ooh, does that mean we're going to finally find out what Snape is so mad at Harry about? Maybe we'll find out, you know, a little bit about Snape's past. I always found him to be A very interesting character. He's not a bad guy, but he's not a good guy. He's like that perfect anti-villain? I don't know what to call him. Alrighty then. No one in Gryffindor Tower slept that night. They knew that the castle was being searched again, and the whole house stayed awake in the common room, waiting to hear whether Black had been caught. Professor McGonagall came back at dawn to tell them that he had again escaped. Everywhere they went the next day, they saw signs of tighter security. Professor Flitwick could be seen teaching the front doors to recognize a large picture of Sirius Black. That's right, teaching the front doors. Filch was suddenly bustling up and down the corridors, boarding up everything from tiny cracks in the walls to mouse holes. Sir Cadogan had been sacked. His portrait had been taken back to its lonely landing on the 7th floor, and the fat lady was back. She had been expertly restored, but was still extremely nervous, and had only agreed to return to her job on condition that she was given extra protection. A bunch of surly security trolls had been hired to guard her. They paced the corridor in a menacing group, talking in grunts and comparing the sizes of their clubs. Harry couldn't help noticing that the statue of the one-eyed witch on the 3rd floor remained unguarded and unblocked. It seemed that Fred and George had been right in thinking that they, and now Harry, Ron, and Hermione, were the only ones who knew about the hidden passageway within it. "Do you reckon we should tell someone?" Harry asked Ron. "We know he's not coming in through Honeydukes," said Ron dismissively. We'd have heard if the shop had been broken into. He was glad Ron took this view. If the one-eyed witch was boarded up too, he would never be able to go into Hogsmeade again. Ron had become an instant celebrity. For the first time in his life, people were paying more attention to him than to Harry, and it was clear that Ron was rather enjoying the experience. Though still severely shaken by the night's events, he was happy to tell anyone who asked what had happened with a wealth of detail. "I was asleep, and I heard this ripping noise. I thought it was a dream, you know? But then there was this draft. I woke up, and one side of the hangings on my bed had been pulled down. I rolled over, and I saw him standing over me, like a skeleton, with loads of filthy hair, holding this great long knife. Must have been 12 inches. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and then I yelled, and then he scapered." "Why, though?" Ron added to Harry, as the group of second-year girls who had been listening to his chilling tale departed. "Why did he scaper?" Harry had been wondering the same thing. Why had Black, having got the wrong bed, not silenced Ron and proceeded to Harry? Black had proved 12 years ago that he didn't mind murdering innocent people, and this time he'd been facing 5 unarmed boys, 4 of whom were asleep. "He must have known he'd have a job getting back out of the castle once you'd yelled and woken people up," said Harry thoughtfully. "He would have had to kill the whole house to get back through the portrait hole, and then he would have met the teachers." Neville was in total disgrace. Professor McGonagall was so furious with him that she had banned him from all future Hogsmeade visits, giving him a detention and forbidden anyone to give him the password into the tower. Poor Neville was forced to wait outside the common room every night for someone to let him in, while the security trolls leered unpleasantly at him. None of these punishments, however, came close to matching the one his grandmother had in store for him. 2 days after Black's break-in, she sent Neville the very worst thing a Hogwarts student could receive over breakfast: a howler. The school owl swooped into the Great Hall, carrying the post as usual, and Neville choked on a huge barn owl landed in front of him, a scarlet envelope clutched in its beak. Harry and Ron, who had been sitting opposite him, recognized the letter as a howler at once. Ron had got one from his mom the year before. "Run for it, Neville," Ron advised. Neville didn't need telling twice. He seized the envelope and, holding it before him like a bomb, sprinted out of the hall, while the Slytherin table exploded with laughter at the sight of him. They heard the howler go off in the entrance hall, Neville's grandmother's voice magically magnified to 100 times its usual volume, shrieking about how he had brought shame on the whole family. Harry was too busy feeling sorry for Neville to notice immediately that he had a letter too. Hedwig got his attention by nipping him sharply on the wrist. "Ouch! Oh, thanks, Hedwig." Harry tore open the envelope while Hedwig helped herself to some of Neville's cornflakes. The note inside said, "Dear Harry and Ron, how about having tea with me this evening round 6? I'll come and collect you from the castle. Wait for me in the entrance hall. You're not allowed on your own. Cheers, Hagrid." "He probably wants to hear all about Black," said Ron. At 6 o'clock that evening, Harry and Ron left Gryffindor Tower, passed the security trolls at a run, and headed down to the entrance hall. Hagrid was already waiting for them. "All right, Hagrid," said Ron. "Suppose you want to hear about Saturday night, do you?" "I've already heard all about it," said Hagrid, opening the front doors and leading them outside. "Oh," said Ron, slightly put out. The first thing they saw on entering Hagrid's cabin was Buckbeak, who was stretched out on top of Hagrid's patchwork quilt, his enormous wings folded tightly to his body, enjoying a large plate of dead ferrets. Averting his eyes from this unpleasant sight, Harry saw a gigantic, hairy brown suit and a very horrible yellow-orange tie hanging from the top of Hagrid's wardrobe door. "What are they for?" said Harry. "Buckbeak's case against the Committee for Disposal of Dangerous Creatures," said Hagrid. "This Friday. Him and me'll be going down to London together. I booked 2 beds on the night bus." Harry felt a nasty pang of guilt. He had completely forgotten that Buckbeak's trial was so near, and judging by the uneasy look on Ron's face, he had too. They had almost forgotten their promise about helping him prepare Buckbeak's defense. The arrival of the firebolt had driven it clear out of their minds. Hagrid poured them tea and offered them a plate of bath buns. That's what it says, bath buns. Aw, thanks, Uncle Patrick. Uncle Pat. I'm glad you're enjoying the reading. You should stay and listen. Hi, Michelle. Wave. Sorry. Bath buns. That's what it says, bath buns. I'm assuming they're from Bath, because Bath is capitalized. All right. But they knew better than to accept. They'd had too many experiences of Hagrid's cooking. "I got something to discuss with you two," said Hagrid, sitting himself between them and looking uncharacteristically serious. "What?" said Harry. "Hermione," said Hagrid. "What about her?" said Ron. "She's in a right state, that's what. She's been coming down to visit me a lot since Christmas. Been feeling lonely. First you just won't talk to her because of the firebolt. Now you're not talking to her because her cat ate Scabbers," Ron interjected angrily. "Because her cat acted like cats do," Hagrid continued doggedly. "She cried a fair few times, you know. Going through a rough time at the moment. Bitten off more than she can chew, if you ask me, all the work she's trying to do. Still found time to help me with Buckbeak's case, mind. She's found some really good stuff for me. Reckon he'll stand a good chance now." "Hagrid, we should have helped as well. Sorry," said Harry awkwardly. "I'm not blaming you," said Hagrid, waving Harry's apology aside. "God knows you've had enough to be getting on with. I've seen you practicing Quidditch every hour of the day and night, and I gotta tell you, I thought you two valued your friendship more than broomsticks and rats. That's all." Harry and Ron exchanged uncomfortable looks. "Really upset she was when Black nearly stabbed you, Ron. She's got heart in the right place, Hermione, and you two not talking to her. If she'd just get rid of that cat, I'd speak to her again," Ron said angrily. "But she's sticking up for it. It's a maniac, and she won't hear a word against it." "Ah, well, people can be a bit stupid about their pets," said Hagrid wisely. Behind him, Buckbeak spat a few ferret bones onto Hagrid's pillow. They spent the rest of their visit discussing Gryffindor's improved chances for the Quidditch Cup. At 9 o'clock, Hagrid walked them back up to the castle. A large group of people was bunched around the notice board when they returned to the common room. "Hogsmeade next week," said Ron, craning over the heads to read the new notice. "What do you reckon?" he added quietly to Harry as they went to sit down. "Well, Filch hasn't done anything about the passage to Honeydukes," Harry said, even more quietly. "Harry!" said a voice right in his ear. Harry started and turned around at Hermione, who was sitting at the table right behind them and clearing a space in the wall for the books that had been hiding her. Harry, if you go into Hogsmeade again, I'll tell Professor McGonagall about the map, said Hermione. Can you hear someone talking, Harry? Growled Ron, not looking at Hermione. Ron, how could you let him go with you, after what Sirius Black nearly did to you? I mean, I tell you. So now you're trying to get Harry expelled? Said Ron furiously. Haven't you done enough damage this year? Hermione opened her mouth to respond, but with a soft hiss, Crookshanks leapt onto her lap. Hermione took one frightened look at the expression on Ron's face, gathered Crookshanks up, and hurried away towards the girls' dormitories. So how about it? Ron said to Harry, as though there had been no interruption. Come on, last time we went, you didn't see anything. You haven't even been inside Zonko's yet. Harry looked around to check that Hermione was out of earshot. Okay, he said, but I'm taking the invisibility cloak this time. On Saturday morning, Harry packed his invisibility cloak in his bag, slipped the Marauder's map into his pocket, and went down to breakfast with everyone else. Hermione kept shooting suspicious looks down the table at him, but he avoided her eye, and was careful to let her see him walking back up the marble staircase to the entrance hall as everyone else proceeded to the front doors. Bye, Harry called to Ron. See you when you get back. Ron grinned and winked. Harry hurried up to the third floor, slipping the Marauder's map out of his pocket as he went. Crouching behind the one-eyed witch, he smoothed it out. A tiny dot was moving in his direction. Harry squinted at it. The minuscule writing next to it read, Neville Longbottom. Harry quickly pulled out his wand and said, Descendium, and shoved his bag into the statue. Before he could climb in, Neville came round the corner. Harry! I forgot you weren't going to Hogsmeade either. Hi, Neville, said Harry, moving swiftly away from the statue and pushing the map back into his pocket. What are you up to? Nothing, shrugged Neville. Want a game of Exploding Snap? Not now. I was going to go to the library and do that vampire essay for Lupin. I'll come with you, said Neville brightly. I haven't done it either. Hang on. Yeah, I forgot. I finished it last night. Oh, brilliant. You can help me, said Neville, his round face anxious. I don't understand that thing about the garlic at all. Do they have to eat it or... Freya! Sit. Good girl. Do they have to eat it or... Neville broke off with a small gasp, looking over Harry's shoulder. It was Snape. Neville took a quick step behind Harry. What are you two doing here? Said Snape, coming to a halt, and looking from one to the other. An odd place to meet. To Harry's immense disquiet, Snape's black eyes flickered to the doorway on either side of them, and then to the one-eyed witch. We're not meeting here, said Harry. We just met here. Indeed, said Snape. You have a habit of turning up in unexpected places, Potter, and you are rarely there for no reason. I suggest the pair of you return to Gryffindor Tower, where you belong. Harry and Neville set off without another word. As they turned the corner, Harry looked back. Snape was running one of his hands over the one-eyed witch's head, examining it closely. Harry managed to shake Neville off at the fat lady by telling him the password, and then pretending he left his vampire essay in the library and doubling back. Once out of sight of the security trolls, he pulled out the map again and held it close to his nose. The third-floor corridor seemed to be deserted. Harry scanned the map carefully and saw, with a leap of relief, that the tiny dot labeled Severus Snape was now back in its office. He sprinted back to the one-eyed witch, opened her hump, heaved himself inside, and slid down to meet his bag at the bottom of the stone chute. He wiped the Marauder's map blank again and then set off at a run. Harry, completely hidden beneath the invisibility cloak, emerged into the sunlight outside Honeyduke's and prodded Ron in the back. It's me, he muttered. What kept you? Ron hissed. Snape was hanging around. And they set off up High Street. Where are you? Ron kept muttering out of the corner of his mouth. Are you still there? This feels weird. They went to the post office. Ron pretended to be checking the price of an owl to Bill in Egypt, so that Harry could have a good look around. The owl sat hooting softly down at him, at least 300 of them, from great greys right down to tiny little Scoops owls, local deliveries only, which were so small you could have set it in the palm of Harry's hand. I want a little baby owl. Then they visited Zonko's, which was so packed with students, Harry had to exercise great care not to tread on anyone and cause panic. There were jokes and tricks to fulfill even Fred and George's wildest dreams. Harry gave Ron whispered orders and passed him some gold from under the cloak. They left Zonko's with their money bags considerably lighter than they had been on entering, but their pockets bulging with dung bombs, hiccuping sweets, dog-spawn soap, and a nose-biting teacup apiece. The day was fine and breezy, and neither of them felt like staying indoors. So they walked past the 3 broomsticks and climbed a slope to visit the Shrieking Shack, the most haunted dwelling in Britain. It stood a little way above the village, and even in daylight was slightly creepy, with its boarded windows and dank, overgrown garden. Even the Hogwarts ghosts avoid it, said Harry, as they leaned on the fence looking up at it. I heard Nearly Headless Nick. He said he heard a rough crowd lived in there. No one can get in. Fred and George tried, obviously, but all the entrances are sealed up. Harry, feeling hot from their climb, was just considering taking off the cloak for a few minutes when they heard voices nearby. Someone was climbing towards the house from the other side of the hill. Moments later, Malfoy had appeared, followed closely by Crabbe and Goyle. Malfoy was speaking. Should have had an owl from Father any time now. He had to go to the hearing to tell them about my arm. About how I couldn't use it for 3 months. Crabbe and Goyle snickered. I really wish I could hear that great Harry moron trying to defend himself. There's no harm in I'm honest. That hypocrite's as good as dead. Malfoy suddenly caught sight of Ron. His pale face split into a malevolent grin. What are you doing, Weasley? Malfoy looked up at the crumbling house behind Ron. Suppose you'd live in here, wouldn't you, Weasley? Dreaming about having your own bedroom? I heard your family all sleep in one room. Is that true? Harry seized the back of Ron's robes to stop him from leaping on Malfoy. Leave him to me, he hissed in Ron's ear. The opportunity was too perfect to miss. Harry crept silently around Malfoy. Crabbe and Goyle bent down and scooped up a large handful of mud from the path. We were discussing your friend Hagrid, Malfoy said to Ron, just trying to imagine what he's saying to the committee for the disposal of dangerous creatures. Do you think he'll cry when they cut off his hippogriff's splat? Malfoy's head jerked forwards as the mud hit him. His silvery blonde hair was suddenly dripping in muck. What the? Ron had to hold onto the fence to keep himself standing. He was laughing so hard. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle spun stupidly on the spot, staring wildly around, Malfoy trying to wipe his hair clean. What was that? Who did that? Very haunted up here, isn't it? Said Ron, with the air of one commenting on the weather. He was laughing. Crabbe and Goyle were looking scared. Their bulging muscles were no use against ghosts. Malfoy was staring madly around at the deserted landscape. Harry sneaked along the path where a particularly sloppy puddle yielded some foul-smelling green sludge. Splat! Crabbe and Goyle caught some this time. Goyle hopping furiously on the spot, trying to rub it out of his small, dull eyes. It came from over there, said Malfoy, wiping his face, staring at the same spot 6 feet to the left of Harry. Crabbe blundered forward, his long arms outstretched like a zombie. Harry dodged around him, picked up a stick, and lobbed it at Crabbe's back. Harry doubled up with silent laughter as Crabbe did a kind of pirouette in mid-air, trying to see who had thrown it. As Ron was the only person Crabbe could see, it was Ron he started for. But Harry stuck at his leg. Crabbe stumbled, and his huge fat foot caught the hem of Harry's cloak. Harry felt a great tug, then the cloak slid off his face. For a split second, Malfoy stared at him. "Ah!" he yelled, pointing at Harry's head, and then he turned tail and ran at breakneck speed back down the hill, Crabbe and Goyle behind him. Harry tugged the cloak back up again, but the damage was done. "Harry!" Ron said, stumbling forward and staring hopelessly at the point where Harry had disappeared. "You better run for it. If Malfoy tells anyone, you better get back to the castle. Quick!" "See you later," said Harry, and without another word, he tore back down the path towards Hogsmeade. Would Malfoy believe what he had seen? Would anyone believe Malfoy? Nobody knew about the invisibility cloak. Nobody except Dumbledore. Harry's stomach turned over. Dumbledore would know exactly what had happened if Malfoy said anything. Back into Honeydukes, back down the stone steps, across the stone floor, through the trapdoor, Harry pulled off the cloak, tucked it under his arm, and ran flat out along the passage. Malfoy would get back first. How long would it take him to find the teacher? Panting, a sharp pain in his side, Harry didn't slow down until he reached the stone slide. He would have to leave the cloak where it was. It was too much of a giveaway if Malfoy had tipped off a teacher. He hid it in a shadowy corner and then started to climb, fast as he could, his sweaty hands slipping on the sides of the chute. He reached the inside of the witch's hump, tapped it with his wand, stuck his head through and hoisted himself out. The hump closed. Just as Harry jumped out from behind the statue, he heard quick footsteps approaching. It was Snape. He approached Harry at a swift walk, his black robes swooshing. That's the Shrieking Shack, guys. His black coat swooshing and then stopped in front of him. "So," he said. There was a look of suppressed triumph about him. Harry tried to look innocent, all too aware of his sweaty face and his muddy hands, which he quickly hid in his pockets. "Come with me, Potter," said Snape. Harry followed him downstairs, trying to wipe his hands clean on the inside of his robes, without Snape noticing. They walked down the stairs to the dungeons, and then into Snape's office. Harry had only been in here once before, and he had been in very serious trouble then, too. Snape had acquired a few more horrible slimy things in jars since last time, all standing on shelves behind his desk, glinting in the firelight and adding to the threatening atmosphere. "Sit," said Snape. "Freya!" "Freya!" "Get up here." She wants to go investigate the litter box. It's a big no-no. Harry sat. Snape, however, remained standing. "Mr. Malfoy has just been to see me with a strange story, Potter," said Snape. Harry didn't say anything. "He tells me that he was up by the Shrieking Shack when he ran into Weasley, apparently alone." Still, Harry didn't speak. "Mr. Malfoy states that he was standing talking to Weasley when a large amount of mud hit him in the back of the head. How do you think that could have happened?" Harry tried to look mildly surprised. "I don't know, Professor." Snape's eyes were boring into Harry's. It was exactly like trying to stare out a hippogriff. Harry tried hard not to blink. "Mr. Malfoy then saw an extraordinary apparition. Can you imagine what it might have been, Potter?" "No," said Harry, still trying to sound innocently curious. "It was your head, Potter, floating in midair." There was a long silence. "Maybe he better go see Madame Pomfrey," said Harry. If he's seeing things like... "Why, what would your head have been doing in Hogsmeade, Potter?" said Snape softly. "Your head is not allowed in Hogsmeade. No part of your body has permission to be in Hogsmeade." "I know that," said Harry, striving to keep his face free of guilt or fear. "It sounds like Malfoy's having hallucination." "Malfoy is not having hallucinations," snarled Snape. He bent down and handed a hand on each arm of Harry's chair so that their faces were a foot apart. If your head was in Hogsmeade, so was the rest of you. I've been in Gryffindor Tower, said Harry, like you told. Can anyone confirm that? Harry didn't say anything. Snape's thin mouth curled into a horrible smile. So, he said, straightening up again, everyone from the Minister from Magic downwards has been trying to keep famous Harry Potter safe from Sirius Black. But famous Harry Potter is a law unto himself. Let the ordinary people worry about his safety. Famous Harry Potter goes where he wants to, with no thought for the consequences. Harry stayed silent. Snape was trying to provoke him into telling the truth. He wasn't going to do it. Snape had no proof. Yet. How extraordinarily like your father you are, Potter, Snape said suddenly. His eyes glinted. He, too, was exceedingly arrogant. A small amount of talent on the Quidditch pitch made him think he was a cut above the rest of us, too. Strutting around the place with his friends and admirers, the resemblance between you is uncanny. My dad didn't strut, said Harry before he could stop himself, and nor do I. Your father didn't set much store for rules. Yeah, your father didn't set much store by rules either, Snape went on, pressing his advantage, his thin face full of malice. Rules were for lesser mortals, not Quidditch Cup winners. His head was so swollen. Shut up! Harry was suddenly on his feet. Rage, such as he had never felt since his last night in Privet Drive, was thundering through him. He didn't care that Snape's face had gone rigid, the black eyes flashing dangerously. What did you say to me, Potter? I told you to shut up about my dad, Harry yelled. I know the truth, all right? He saved your life. Dumbledore told me. You wouldn't even be here if it weren't for my dad. Snape's sallow skin had gone the color of sour milk. And did the headmaster tell you the circumstances in which your father saved my life? He whispered. Or did he consider the details too unpleasant for precious Potter's delicate ears? Harry bit his lip. He didn't know what had happened and didn't want to admit it. But Snape seemed to have guessed the truth. I would hate you to run away with a false idea of your father, Potter, he said, a terrible grin twisting his face. Have you been imagining some sort of glorious heroism? Then let me correct you. Your saintly father and his friends played a highly amusing joke on me that would have resulted in my death if your father hadn't got cold feet at the last moment. There was nothing brave about what he did. He was saving his own skin as much as mine. Had their joke succeeded, he would have been expelled from Hogwarts. Snape's uneven, yellowish teeth were bared. Turn out your pockets, Potter, he spat suddenly. Harry didn't move. There was a pounding in his ears. Turn out your pockets, or we go straight to the headmaster. Pull them out, Potter. Cold with dread, Harry slowly pulled out a bag of Zonko's tricks and the Marauder's map. Snape picked up the Zonko's bag. Ron gave them to me, said Harry, praying he got a chance to tip Ron off before Snape saw him. He brought them back from Hogsmeade last time. Indeed. And you've been carrying them round ever since? How very touching. And what's this? Snape had picked up the map. Harry tried with all his might to keep his face impassive. Spare bit of parchment? He shrugged. Snape turned it over, his eyes on Harry. Surely you don't need such a very old piece of parchment, he said. Why don't I just throw this away? He moved towards the fire. No! Harry said quickly. So, said Snape, his long nostrils quivering, is this another treasured gift from Mr. Weasley? Or is it something else? A letter, perhaps, written in invisible ink? Or instructions to get into Hogsmeade without passing the Dementors? Harry blinked. Snape's eyes gleamed. Let me see, he muttered, taking out his wand and smoothing the map out on his desk. Reveal your secret, he said, touching the wand to the map parchment. Nothing happened. Harry clenched his hands to keep them from shaking. Show yourself, Snape said, tapping the map sharply. It stayed blank. Harry was taking deep, calming breaths. Professor Severus Snape, master of this school, commands you yield the information you conceal, Snape said, hitting the map with his wand. As though an invisible hand was writing upon it, words appeared on the smooth surface of the map. Mr. Moody presents his compliments. Mr. Mooney, M-O-O-N-Y, M-O-O-N. Mr. Mooney presents his compliments to Professor Snape and begged him to keep his abnormally large nose out of other people's business. Snape froze. Harry stared, dumbstruck, at the message. But the map didn't stop there. More writing was appearing beneath the first. Mr. Prongs agrees with Mr. Mooney and would like to add that Professor Snape is an ugly git. It would have been very funny if the situation hadn't been so serious. And there was more. Mr. Padfoot would like to register his astonishment that an idiot like that ever became a professor. Harry closed his eyes in horror. When he opened them, the map had had its last word. Mr. Wormtail bids Professor Snape good day and advises him to wash his hair, the slime ball. Harry waited for the blow to fall. So, said Snape softly, we'll see about this. He strode across to his fire, seized a fistful of glittering powder from a jar on the fireplace, and threw it into the flames. Lupin! Snape called into the fire. I want a word! Utterly bewildered, Harry stared at the fire. A large shape had appeared in it, revolving very fast. Seconds later, Professor Lupin was climbing out of the fireplace and brushing ash off his shabby robes. You called, Severus? Said Lupin mildly. I certainly did, said Snape, his face contorted with fury as he strode back to his desk. I've just asked Potter to empty his pockets. He was carrying this. Snape pointed at the parchment, on which the words of Messrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs were still shining. An odd, closed expression appeared on Lupin's face. Well, said Snape. Lupin continued to stare at the map. Harry had the impression that Lupin was doing some very quick thinking. Well, said Snape again, this parchment is plainly full of dark magic. This is supposed to be your area of expertise, Lupin. Where do you imagine Potter got such a thing? Lupin looked up, and by the merest half-glance in Harry's direction, warned him not to interrupt. Full of dark magic, he repeated mildly. Do you really think so, Severus? It looks to me as though it is merely a piece of parchment that insults anybody who tries to read it. Childish, but surely not dangerous. I imagine Harry got it from a joke shop. Indeed, said Snape. His jaw had gone rigid with anger. You think a joke shop could supply him with such a thing? You don't think it more likely that he got it directly from the manufacturers? Harry didn't understand what Snape was talking about, nor apparently did Lupin. You mean from Mr. Wormtail or one of these people? He said. Harry, do you know any of these men? No, said Harry quickly. You see, Severus, said Lupin, turning back to Snape, it looks like a Zonko product to me. Right on cue, Ron came bursting into the office. He was completely out of breath and stopped just short of Snape's desk, clutching the stitch in his chest and trying to speak. I gave Harry that stuff, he choked. Bought it at Zonko's ages ago. Well, said Lupin, clapping his hands together and looking around cheerfully. That seems to clear things up. Severus, I'll take this back, shall I? He folded the map and tucked it inside his robes. Harry, Ron, come with me. I need a word about my vampire essay. Excuse us, Severus. Harry didn't dare look at Snape as they left his office. He, Ron, and Lupin walked all the way back into the entrance hall before speaking. Then Harry turned to Lupin. Professor, I don't want to hear explanations, said Lupin shortly. He glanced around the empty entrance hall and lowered his voice. I happen to know this map was confiscated by Mr. Filch many years ago. Yes, I know it's a map, he said as Harry and Ron looked amazed. I don't want to know how it fell into your possession. I am, however, astounded that you didn't hand it in, particularly after what happened the last time a student left information about the castle laying around. And I can't let you have it back, Harry." Harry had expected that, and was too keen for explanations to protest. "Why did Snape think I got it from the manufacturers?" "Because," Lupin hesitated, "because these map makers would have wanted to lure you out of the school. They'd think it extremely entertaining." "Do you know them?" said Harry, impressed. "We've met," he said shortly. He was looking at Harry more seriously than ever before. "Don't expect me to cover for you again, Harry. I cannot make you take Sirius Black seriously, but I would have thought that what you had heard when the Dementors drew near you would have more of an effect on you. Your parents gave their lives to keep you alive, Harry. A poor way to repay them, gambling their sacrifice for a bag of magic tricks." He walked away, leaving Harry feeling worse than before. Slowly, he and Ron mounted the marble staircase. As Harry passed the one-eyed witch, he remembered the invisibility cloak. It was still down there, but he didn't dare go and get it. "It's my fault," said Ron abruptly. "I persuaded you to go. Lupin's right. It was stupid. We shouldn't have done it." He broke off. They reached the corridor where the security trolls were pacing, and Hermione was walking towards them. One look at her face convinced Harry that she had heard what had happened. His heart plummeted. Had she told Professor McGonagall? "Come to have a good gloat," said Ron savagely as she stopped in front of them. "Or have you just been to tell on us?" "No," said Hermione. She was holding a letter in her hands, and her lip was trembling. "I just thought you ought to know. Hagrid lost his case. Buckbeak is going to be executed." And that's the end of the chapter, guys. Do you want me to try reading another one? We've got a little bit longer left. Oh, I lied. This one's pretty long. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for any compliments, comments, and anything like that. Oh, you want one more, Angie? Do you want one more? I will read one more. As long as you guys have the time. Okay. I just want to make sure Manny gets there for his Boy Scouts meeting. Ew, Angie. I'm just reading all these comments. Okay. Tootsie Rolls. All right. So, the next chapter is the Quidditch Final. Oh. Let me drink some water. Okay. The Quidditch Final, and it has tarot cards. He sent me this, Hermione said, holding out the letter. Harry took it. The parchment was damp, and enormous teardrops had smudged the ink so badly in places that it was very difficult to read. "Dear Hermione, we lost. I'm allowed to bring him back to Hogwarts. Execution date to be fixed. Beaky has enjoyed London. I won't forget all the help you gave us. Hagrid." "They can't do this," said Harry. "They can't. Buckbeak isn't dangerous." "Malfoy's dad frightened the committee into it," said Hermione, wiping her eyes. "You know what he's like. They're a bunch of dottery old fools, and they're scared. There'll be an appeal, though. There always is. Only, I can't see any hope. Nothing has changed." "Nothing will have changed." "Yeah, it will," said Ron fiercely. "You won't have to do all the work alone this time. I'll help." "Oh, Ron!" Hermione flung her arms around Ron's neck and broke down completely. Ron looked quite terrified. patted her very awkwardly on the top of the head. Finally, Hermione drew away. Ron, I'm really, really sorry about Scabbers, she sobbed. Oh, well, he was old, said Ron, looking thoroughly relieved that she had let him go. And he was a bit useless, you know. Mum and Dad might get me an owl now. The safety measures imposed on the students since Black's second break-in made it impossible for Harry, Ron, and Hermione to go and visit Hagrid in the evenings. Their only chance to talk to him was during Care of Magical Creatures lessons. He seemed dumb with shock at the verdict. It's all my fault. Got all tongue-tied. They were all sitting there in black robes, and I kept dropping me notes and forgetting all them dates you looked up for me, Hermione. And then Lucius Malfoy stood up and said his bit, and the committee just did exactly what he told them. There's still the appeal, said Ron fiercely. Don't give up yet. We're working on it. They were walking back up to the castle with the rest of the class. Ahead, they could see Malfoy, who was walking with Crabbe and Goyle, and kept looking back and laughing. Derisively. Derisively? Derisively. That's a word. It's no good, Ron, said Hagrid sadly as they reached the castle steps. That committee's in Lucius Malfoy's pocket. I'm just going to make sure the rest of Beaky's time is the happiest he ever had. I owe him that. Hagrid turned round and hurried back towards his cabin, his face buried in his handkerchief. Look at him blubber! Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle had been standing just inside the castle doors, listening. Have you ever seen anything quite so pathetic? Said Malfoy. And he's supposed to be our teacher! Harry and Ron both made furious moves towards Malfoy, but Hermione got there first. Smack! She had slapped Malfoy round the face with all the strength she could muster. Malfoy staggered. Harry, Ron, Crabbe, and Goyle stood flabbergasted as Hermione raised her hand again. Don't you dare call Hagrid pathetic, you foul, evil... Hermione, said Ron weakly, and he tried to grab her as she swung back. Get off, Ron! Hermione pulled at her wand. Malfoy stepped backwards. Crabbe and Goyle looked at him for instructions, thoroughly bewildered. Come on, Malfoy muttered, and next moment all three of them had disappeared into the passageway to the dungeons. Hermione, Ron said again, sounding both stunned and impressed. Harry, you better beat him in the Quidditch final, Hermione said shrilly. You just better had, because I can't stand it if Slytherin wins. I think there was a typo in that sentence. We're doing charms, said Ron, still goggling at Hermione. We better go. They hurried up the marble staircase toward Professor Flitwick's classroom. You're late, boys, said Professor Flitwick reprovingly as Harry opened the classroom door. Come on, quickly, wands out. We're experimenting with cheering charms today. We've already divided into pairs. Harry and Ron hurried to the desk at the back and opened their bags. Ron looked behind him. Where'd Hermione go? Harry looked round too. Hermione hadn't entered the classroom, yet Harry knew she was right next to them when he had opened the door. That's weird, said Harry, staring at Ron. Maybe she went to the bathroom or something. But Hermione didn't turn up all lesson. She could have done with a cheering charm on her, too, said Ron, as the class left for lunch, all grinning broadly. The cheering charms had left them with feelings of great contentment. Hermione wasn't at lunch either. By the time they had finished their apple pie, the after effects of the cheering charms had worn off. Harry and Ron had started to get slightly worried. You don't think Malfoy did something to her? Ron said anxiously as they hurried upstairs towards Gryffindor Tower. They passed the security trolls, giving the fat lady the password, Flibbertigibbet, and scrambled through the portrait hole into the common room. Hermione was sitting at the fire, fast asleep, her head resting on an open arithmetic book. They went to sit down on either side of her. Harry prodded her awake. What? Said Hermione, waking with a start and staring wildly around. Is it time to go? What lesson do we have next? Divination, but it's not for another 20 minutes, said Harry. Hermione, why didn't you come to Charms? What? Oh, no, Hermione squeaked. I forgot to go to Charms. But how could you forget, said Harry. You were with us till we were right outside the classroom. I don't believe it, Hermione wailed. Was Professor Flitwick angry? Oh, it was Malfoy. I was thinking about him and I lost track of things. You know what, Hermione, said Ron, looking down at the enormous arithmancy book Hermione had been using as a pillow. I reckon you're cracking up. You're trying to do too much. No, I'm not, said Hermione, brushing her hair out of her eyes and staring hopelessly around for her bag. I just made a mistake, that's all. I'd better go and see Professor Flitwick and say sorry. I'll see you in divination. Hermione joined them at the foot of the ladder to Professor Trelawney's classroom 20 minutes later, looking extremely harassed. I still can't believe I missed cheering charms. I bet they come up in our exam. Professor Flitwick hinted they might. Together they climbed the ladder into the dim, stifling tower room. Glowing on every tabletop was a crystal ball full of pearly white mist. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat down together at the same rickety table. I thought we weren't starting crystal balls until next time, Ron muttered, casting a weary eye round for Professor Trelawney in case she was lurking nearby. Don't complain. This means we've finished palmistry, Harry muttered. I was getting sick of her flinching every time she looked at my hands. Good to see you, said the familiar misty voice, and Professor Trelawney made her usual dramatic entrance out of the shadows. Parvati and Lavender quivered with excitement, their faces lit by the milky glow of their crystal ball. I have decided to introduce the crystal ball a little earlier than I had planned, said Professor Trelawney, seating herself with her back to the fire and gazing around. The fates have informed me that your examination in June will concern the orb, and I am anxious to give you sufficient practice. Hermione snorted. Well, honestly, the fates have informed her. Who sets the exams? She does. What an amazing prediction, she said, not troubling to keep her voice low. It was hard to tell whether Professor Trelawney had heard them, as her face was hidden in shadow. She continued, however, as though she had not. Crystal gazing is a particularly refined art, she said dreamily. I do not expect any of you to see when you first peer into the orb's infinite depths. We shall start by practicing relaxing the conscious mind and external eyes. Ron began to snicker uncontrollably and to stuff his fist in his mouth to stifle the noise. So as to clear the inner eye and the superconsciousness. Perhaps, if we're lucky, some of you will see before the end of class. And so they began. Harry, at least, felt extremely foolish, staring blankly at the crystal ball and trying to keep his mind empty when thoughts such as, "This is stupid," kept drifting across it. It didn't help that Ron kept breaking into silent giggles and Hermione kept tutting. "Seen anything yet?" Harry asked them, after a quarter of an hour's quiet crystal gazing. "Yes, there's a burn on this table," said Ron. "Someone spilled their candle." "This is such a waste of time," Hermione hissed. "I could be practicing something useful. I could be catching up on cheering charms." Professor Trelawney rustled past. "Would anyone like me to help them interpret the shadowy portents within their orb?" she muttered over the clinking of her bangles. "I don't need help," Ron whispered. "It's obvious what this means. There's going to be loads of fog tonight." Both Harry and Hermione burst out laughing. "Now really," said Professor Trelawney as everyone's head turned in their direction. Parvati and Lavender were looking scandalized. "You are disturbing the clairvoyant vibrance." She approached their table and peered into their crystal ball. Harry felt his heart sinking. He was sure he knew what was coming. "There's something here," Professor Trelawney whispered, lowering her face to the ball. Soon it was reflected twice in her huge eyes. "Something moving. But what is it?" Harry was prepared to bet anything he owned, including his firebolt, that it wasn't good news, whatever it was, and sure enough. "My dear," Professor Trelawney breathed, gazing at Harry. It is here, plainer than ever before. My dear, stalking towards you, growing ever closer. Oh, for goodness sake, said Hermione loudly. Not the ridiculous Grim again. Professor Trelawney raised her enormous eyes to Hermione's face. Parvati whispered something to Lavender, and they both glared at Hermione too. Professor Trelawney stood up, surveying Hermione with unmistakable anger. I'm sorry to say that from the moment you have arrived in this class, my dear, it has appeared that you do not have what the noble art of divination requires. Indeed, I don't remember ever meeting a student whose mind was so hopelessly mundane. There was a moment's silence, and then, Fine, said Hermione suddenly, getting up and cramming Unfogging the Future back into her bag. Fine, she said, swinging the bag over her shoulder and almost knocking Ron off his chair. I give up. I'm leaving. And then, to the whole class' astonishment, Hermione strode over to the trapdoor, kicked it open, and climbed down the ladder and out of sight. It took a few moments for the class to settle. Professor Trelawney seemed to have forgotten all about the Grim. She turned abruptly from Harry and Ron's table, breathing rather heavily as she tugged her gauzy shawl more closely around her. Oh, said Lavender suddenly, making everyone start. Oh, Professor Trelawney, I just remembered. I saw her leaving, didn't you? Didn't you, Professor? Around Easter, one of our number will leave us forever. You said it ages ago, Professor. Professor Trelawney gave her a dewy smile. Yes, my dear, I did indeed know that Miss Granger would be leaving us. One hopes, however, that one might be mistaking the signs. The inner eye can be a burden, you know. Lavender and Parvati looked deeply impressed and moved over so that Professor Trelawney could join them at their table. Some day Hermione's having, eh? Ron muttered to Harry, looking odd. Freya! But lay down. You stay. Some day Hermione's having, eh? Ron muttered to Harry, looking odd. Yeah. Harry glanced into the crystal ball, but saw nothing but swirling white mist. Had Professor Trelawney really seen the Grim again? Would he? The last thing he needed was another near-fatal accident, with the Quidditch final drawing ever nearer. Easter holidays were not exactly relaxing. Third years had never had so much homework. Neville Longbottom seemed close to a nervous collapse, and he wasn't the only one. Call this a holiday? Seamus Finnegan roared in the common room one afternoon. The exams are ages away. What are they playing at? But nobody had as much to do as Hermione. Even without divination, she was taking more subjects than anyone else. She was usually last to leave the common room at night, and first to arrive in the library the next morning. She had shadows like lupins under her eyes, and seemed constantly close to tears. Ron had taken over responsibility for Buckbeak's appeal. When he wasn't doing his own work, he was poring over enormous thick volumes with names like The Handbook of Hippogriff Psychology and Fowl or Foul, F-O-W-L or F-O-U-L, a study of hippogriff brutality. He was so absorbed, he even forgot to be horrible to Crookshanks. Harry, meanwhile, had to fit in his homework around Quidditch practice every day, not to mention endless discussions of tactics with Wood. The Gryffindor to Slytherin match would take place the first Saturday after Easter holiday. Slytherin were leading the tournament by exactly 200 points. This meant, as Wood continuously reminded his team, that they needed to win the match by more than that amount to win the cup. It also meant that the burden of winning fell largely on Harry, because capturing the snitch was worth 150 points. So, you must only catch it if we're more than 50 points up, Wood told Harry constantly. Only if we're more than 50 points, Harry, or we win the match, but lose the cup. You got that, haven't you? You can only catch the snitch if we're... I know, Oliver, Harry yelled. The whole of Gryffindor House was obsessed with the coming match. Gryffindor hadn't won the cup since the legendary Charlie Weasley, Ron's second oldest brother, had been Seeker. But Harry doubted whether any of them, even Wood, wanted to win as much as he did. The enmity between Harry and Malfoy was at its highest point ever. Enmity. Malfoy was still smarting about the mud-throwing incident in Hogsmeade, and even more furious that Harry had somehow wormed his way out of punishment. Harry hadn't forgotten Malfoy's attempts to sabotage him in the match against Ravenclaw, but it was the matter of Buckbeak that made him most determined to beat Malfoy in front of the entire school. Never, in anyone's memory, had a match approached in such a highly charged atmosphere. By the time the holiday was over, tension between the two teams and their houses was at a breaking point. A number of small scuffles broke out in the corridors, culminating in a nasty incident in which Gryffindor 4th year and a Slytherin 6th year ended up in the hospital wing with leaks sprouting out of their ears. Harry was having a particularly bad time of it. He couldn't walk to class without Slytherins sticking out their legs and trying to trip him. Crabbe and Goyle kept popping up wherever he went and slouching away, looking disappointed when they saw him surrounded by people. Wood had given instructions that Harry should be accompanied everywhere, in case the Slytherins tried to put him out of action. The whole of Gryffindor House took up the challenge enthusiastically, so that it was impossible for Harry to get to class on time because he was surrounded by a vast, chattering crowd. Harry was more concerned for his firebolt's safety than his own. When he wasn't flying it, he locked it securely in his trunk, and frequently dashed back up to Gryffindor Tower at break times to check that it was still there. All usual pursuits were abandoned in the Gryffindor common room the night before the match. Even Hermione had put down her books. "I can't work. I can't concentrate," she said nervously. There was a great deal of noise. Fred and George Weasley were dealing with the pressures by being louder and more exuberant than ever. Oliver Wood was crouched over a model of a Quidditch pitch in the corner, prodding little fingers along it with his wand and muttering to himself. Angelina, Alicia, and Katie were laughing at Fred and George's jokes. Close your eyes, Dum-Dum. My dog's just sitting here staring off into space. Harry was sitting with Ron and Hermione, removed from the center of things, trying not to think about the next day, because every time he did, he had the horrible sensation that something very large was fighting to get out of his stomach. "You're going to be fine," Hermione told him, though she looked positively terrified. "You've got a firebolt," said Ron. "Yeah," said Harry, his stomach writhing. It came as a relief when Wood suddenly stopped and yelled, "Team! Bed!" Harry slept badly. First, he dreamed that he had overslept and that Wood was yelling, "Where are you? We had to use Neville instead!" And then he dreamed that Malfoy and the rest of the Slytherin team arrived for the pitch riding dragons. He was flying at breakneck speed, trying to avoid a spurt of flames from Malfoy's steed's mouth, when he realized he'd forgotten his firebolt. He fell through the air and woke with a start. There were a few seconds before Harry remembered that the match hadn't taken place yet, that he was safe in bed, and that the Slytherin team definitely wouldn't be allowed to play on dragons. He was feeling very thirsty. As quietly as he could, he got out of his four-poster and went to pour himself some water from the silver jug beneath the window. The grounds were still and quiet. No breath of wind disturbed the treetops in the forbidden forest. The whomping willow was motionless and innocent-looking. It looked as though conditions for the match would be perfect. Harry set down his goblet and was about to turn back to his bed when something caught his eye. An animal of some kind was prowling across the silvery lawn. Harry dashed to his bedside. Dashed to his bedside table, snatched up his glasses and put them on, then hurried back to the window. It couldn't be the Grim. Not now, not right before the match. He peered out at the grounds and after a minute's frantic searching, spotted it. It was skirting the edge of the forest now. It wasn't the Grim at all. It was a cat. Harry clutched the window ledge in relief as he recognized the bottle-brush tail. It was Crookshanks. Or was it only Crookshanks? Harry squinted, pressing his nose flat against the glass. Crookshanks seemed to have come to a halt. Harry could see something else moving in the trees, too. The next moment, it had emerged, a gigantic, shaggy black dog, moving stealthily across the lawn. Crookshanks trotted at its side. Harry stared. What did this mean? If Crookshanks could see the dog as well, how could it be an omen of Harry's death? "Ron!" Harry hissed. "Ron, wake up!" "Huh?" I need you to tell me if you see something." "Stark, Harry," Ron muttered thickly. "What you on about?" "Down here." Harry looked quickly back out the window. Crookshanks and the dog had vanished. Harry climbed into the window sill to look right down into the dark shadows of the castle, but they weren't there. Where had they gone? Hi, Auntie Amber. A loud snore told him that Ron had fallen asleep again. ... Harry and the rest of the Gryffindor team entered the Great Hall the next day to enormous applause. Harry couldn't help grinning broadly as he saw that both Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff tables were clapping for them too. The Slytherin table hissed loudly as they passed. Harry noticed that Malfoy looked even paler than usual. Wood spent the whole of breakfast urging his team to eat, while touching nothing himself. Then he hurried them off to the pitch before anyone else had finished, so they got an idea of the conditions. As they left the Great Hall, everyone applauded again. "Good luck, Harry!" called Cho Chang. Harry felt himself blushing. "Okay, no wind to speak of. Sun's a bit bright. That could impair your vision. Watch out for it. Ground's slightly hard. Good. That'll give us a good first kickoff." Wood paced the pitch, staring round with the team behind him. Finally, they saw the front doors of the castle open in the distance, and the rest of the school spilled onto the lawn. "Changing rooms," said Wood tersely. None of them spoke as they changed into their scarlet robes. Harry wondered if they were feeling like he was, as though he'd eaten something extremely wriggly for breakfast. In what seemed like no time at all, Wood was saying, "Okay, it's time. Let's go." They walked out onto the pitch to a tidal wave of noise. 3/4 of the crowd were waving scarlet rosettes, waving scarlet flags for the Gryffindor, with the Gryffindor lion upon them, or brandishing banners with slogans such as "Go Gryffindor" and "Lions for the Cup." Behind the Slytherin goalposts, however, 200 people were wearing green. The silver serpent of Slytherin glittering on their flags, and Professor Snape sat in the very front row, wearing green like everyone else and a very grim smile. "And here are the Gryffindors!" yelled Lee Jordan, who was acting as commentator, as usual. "Potter, Bell, Johnson, Spinnet, Weasley, and Wood. Widely acknowledged as the best side Hogwarts has seen. Widely acknowledged as the best side Hogwarts has seen in a few good years." Lee's comments were drowned by a tidal wave of boos from the Slytherin end. "And here come the Slytherin team, led by Captain Flint. He's made some changes in the lineup. It seems to be going for size rather than skill." More boos from the Slytherin crowd. Harry, however, thought Lee had a point. Malfoy was easily the smallest person on the Slytherin team. The rest of them were enormous. "Captains, shake hands," said Madam Hooch. Flint and Wood approached each other and grasped each other's hands very tightly. They looked as though they were trying to break each other's fingers. "Mount your brooms," said Madam Hooch. 3, 2, 1. The sound of her whistle was lost in the roar from the crowd as 14 brooms rose into the air. Harry felt his hair fly back off his forehead. His nerves left him in a thrill of the flight. He glanced around and saw Malfoy on his tail and sped off in search of the snitch. And it's Gryffindor in possession. Alicia Spinnet of Gryffindor with the quaffle, headed straight for the Slytherin goalpost. Looking good, Alicia. Oh, no. Quaffle intercepted by Warrington. Warrington, a Slytherin, tearing up the pitch. Wham! Nice bludger work there, George Weasley. Warrington dropped the quaffle. It's caught by Johnson. Gryffindor back in possession. Come on, Angelina. Nice swerve round Montague. Duck, Angelina. There's a bludger. She scores. 10-0 to Gryffindor. Angelina punched the air as she soared round the end of the pitch. The sea of scarlet below was screaming in delight. Ouch! Angelina was nearly thrown from her broom as Marcus Flint went smashing into her. Sorry, said Flint as the crowd below booed. Sorry, didn't see her. The next moment, Fred Weasley had chunked his beater's club at the back of Flint's head. Flint's nose smashed into the handle of his broom and began to bleed. That will do, shrieked Madam Hooch, zooming between them. Penalty to Gryffindor for unprovoked attack on their chaser. Penalty to Slytherin for deliberate damage to their chaser. Come off it, miss, howled Fred, but Madam Hooch blew her whistle and Alicia flew forward to take the penalty. Come on, Alicia, yelled Lee into the silence that had descended over the crowd. Yes, she's beaten the keeper. 22 to Gryffindor. Or 20-0 to Gryffindor. Harry turned the firebolt sharply to watch Flint, still bleeding freely, fly forwards to take the Slytherin penalty. Wood was hovering in front of the Gryffindor goalpost, his jaw clenched. Course, Wood's a superb keeper, Lee Jordan told the crowd as Flint waited for Madam Hooch's whistle. Superb! Very difficult to pass, very difficult indeed. Yes, I don't believe it! He saved it! Relieved, Harry zoomed away, gazing round for the snitch, but still making sure he caught every word of Lee's commentary. It was essential that he hold Malfoy off from the snitch until Gryffindor had more than 50 points. Gryffindor in possession! No! Slytherin in possession! No! Gryffindor back in possession, and it's Katie Bell! Katie Bell for Gryffindor with the quaffle. She's streaking up the pitch. That was deliberate! Montague, a Slytherin chaser, had swerved in front of Katie, and instead of seizing the quaffle, had grabbed her head. Katie wheeled in the air, managed to stay on her broom, but dropped the quaffle. Madam Hooch's whistle rang out again as she soared over to Montague and began shouting at him. A minute later, Katie had put another penalty past the Slytherin keeper. 30-0, take that, you dirty cheating Jordan! If you can't commentate it in an unbiased way, I'm telling it like it is, Professor! Harry felt a huge jolt of excitement. He had seen the snitch. It was shimmering at the foot of one of the Gryffindor goalposts, but he mustn't catch it yet. But if Malfoy saw it... Faking a look of sudden concentration, Harry pulled his firebolt round and sped off toward the Slytherin end. It worked. Malfoy was herring after him, clearly thinking Harry had seen the snitch there. Whoosh! One of the bludgers came streaking past Harry's right ear, hit by a gigantic Slytherin beater, Derek. The next moment, whoosh! The second bludger had grazed Harry's elbow. The other beater, Bull, was closing in. Harry had a fleeting glimpse of Bull and Derek zooming towards him, clubs raised. He turned the firebolt upwards at the last second, and Bull and Derek collided with a sickening crunch. Ha ha ha! Yelled Lee Jordan as the Slytherin beaters lurched away from each other, clutching their heads. Too bad, boys! You'll need to get up earlier than that to beat a firebolt. And it's Gryffindor in possession again as Johnson takes the quaffle, Flint alongside her. Poke him in the eye, Angelina! It was a joke, Professor. It was a joke. Oh, no. Flint in possession. Flint flying toward the Gryffindor goalpost. Come on now. Wood, save. But Flint had scored. There was an eruption of cheers from the Slytherin end, and Lee swore so badly that Professor McGonagall tried to tug the magical microphone away from him. Sorry, Professor, sorry. Won't happen again. So, Gryffindor in the lead, 30 points to 10, and Gryffindor in possession. It was turning into the dirtiest match Harry had ever played in. Enraged that Gryffindor had taken such an early lead, the Slytherins were rapidly resorting to any means to take the quaffle. Boyle hit Alicia with his club and tried to say he thought she was a bludger. George Weasley elbowed Bull in the face in retaliation. Madam Hooch awarded both teams penalties, and Wood pulled off another spectacular save, making the score 40-10 to Gryffindor. The snitch had disappeared again. Malfoy was still keeping close to Harry as he soared over the match, looking around for it. Once Gryffindor was 50 points ahead, Katie scored 50-10. Fred and George were whooping around her, clubs raised, in case any of the Slytherins were thinking of revenge. Bull and Derek took advantage of Fred and George's absence to aim both bludgers at Wood. They caught him in the stomach, one after the other, and he rolled over in the air, clutching his broom, completely winded. Madam Hooch was beside herself. "You do not attack the keeper unless the quaffle is within scoring range!" she shrieked at Bull and Derek. "Gryffindor penalty!" And Angelina scored, 60-10. Moments later, Fred Weasley pelted a bludger at Warrington, knocking the quaffle out of his hands. Alicia seized it and put it through the Slytherin goal. 70-10. The Gryffindor crowd below were screaming themselves hoarse. Gryffindors were 60 points in the lead, and if Harry caught the Slitch now, the cup was theirs. Harry could almost feel hundreds of eyes following him as he soared around the pitch, high above the rest of the game, with Malfoy speeding along behind him. And then he saw it. The snitch was sparkling 20 feet above him. Harry put out a huge burst of speed, the wind roaring in his ears. He stretched out his hand, but suddenly the firebolt was slowing down. Horrified, he looked around. Malfoy had thrown himself forward, grabbing hold of his firebolt's tail and pulling it back. "You!" Harry was angry enough to hit Malfoy, but he couldn't reach. Malfoy was panting with the effort of holding onto the firebolt, but his eyes were sparkling maliciously. He had achieved what he wanted. The snitch had disappeared again. "Penalty! Penalty to Gryffindor! I've never seen such tactics!" Madam Hooch screeched, shooting up to where Malfoy was sliding back onto his Nimbus 2001. "You cheating scum!" Lee Jordan was howling into the megaphone, dancing out of Professor McGonagall's reach. "You filthy, cheating Professor McGonagall didn't even bother to tell him off. She was actually shaking her fist in Malfoy's direction. Her hat had fallen off, and she too was shouting furiously. Alicia took Gryffindor's penalty, but she was so angry she missed by several feet. The Gryffindor team was losing concentration, and the Slytherins, delighted by Malfoy's foul on Harry, were being spurred on to greater heights. Slytherin in possession. Slytherin heading for goal. Montague scores. Lee Jordan groaned. Harry was now marking Malfoy so closely their knees kept hitting each other. Harry wasn't going to let Malfoy anywhere near the snitch. "Get off of it, Potter!" Malfoy yelled in frustration as he tried to turn and found Harry blocking him. "Angelina Johnson gets the quaffle for Gryffindor. Come on, Angelina, come on!" Harry looked around. Every single Slytherin player, apart from Malfoy, even the Slytherin keeper, were streaking up the pitch towards Angelina. They were going to block her. Harry wheeled the firebolt about, bent so low he was flying flat along the handle, and kicked it forwards. Like a bullet, he shot toward the Slytherins. Ah! They scattered as the firebolt zoomed towards them. Angelina's way was clear. She scores! She scores! Gryffindor lead by 80 points to 20! Harry, who had almost pelted headlong into the stands, skidded to a halt in midair, reversed, and zoomed back into the middle of the pitch. And then he saw something to make his heart stand still. Malfoy was diving, a look of triumph on his face. There, a few feet above the ground, below, was a tiny golden glimmer. He urged the firebolt downwards, but Malfoy was miles ahead. "Go! Go! Go!" Harry urged his broom. They were gaining on Malfoy. Harry flattened himself to the broom handle as Boyle sent a bludger at him. He was at Malfoy's ankles. He was level! He threw himself forward. Taking both hands off his broom, he knocked Malfoy's arm out of the way, and yes! He pulled out of his dive, his hand in the air. The stadium exploded. Harry soared above the crowd, an odd ringing in his ears. The tiny golden ball was held tight in his fist, beating its wings hopelessly against his fingers. Then Wood was speeding towards him, half blinded by tears. He seized Harry round the neck and sobbed unrestrainedly into his shoulder. Harry felt 2 large thumps as Fred and George hit them. Then Angelina, Alicia, and Katie's voices. "We've won the cup! We've won the cup!" Tangled together in a many-armed hug, the Gryffindor team sank, yelling hoarsely, back to earth. Wave upon wave of Crimson supporters were pouring over the barriers onto the pitch. Hands were raining down on their backs. Harry had a confused impression of noises and bodies pressing in on him. Then he and the rest of the team were hoisted onto the shoulders of the crowd. Thrust into the light, he saw Hagrid, plastered with crimson rosettes. "You beat him, Harry! You beat him! Wait till I tell Buckbeak!" There was Percy, jumping up and down like a maniac, all dignity forgotten. Professor McGonagall was sobbing harder even than Wood, wiping her eyes with an enormous Gryffindor flag. And there, fighting their way towards Harry, were Ron and Hermione. Words failed them. They simply beamed as Harry was borne towards the stands where Dumbledore stood waiting with the enormous Quidditch cup. If there had been a Dementor around, if only there had been a Dementor around. A sobbing Wood passed Harry the cup as he lifted it into the air. Harry felt he could have produced the world's best Patronus. Alright guys, that's the end of that chapter. Tomorrow night we will read chapter 16, Professor Trelawney's Prediction. Thank you for joining me in that lovely game of Quidditch. I must now go retrieve my child. Have a good night. Manny, have fun at Boy Scouts. I have a meeting at 6 o'clock. Love you all. Thanks for listening. Bye.